Obama farewell.
I'm just going to say a couple of quick things before I start taking questions.
At his last press conference as Commander-in-Chief, the president has to answer tough questions. Quakes strike again. A region already battered by deadly earthquakes last year is rattled several more times today. We'll take you to Rome for the latest. Prayer for Christian unity. Pope Francis calls on the faithful to deepen their communion in more visible ways. And preparing for the next First Family. A preview of what it takes before Donald Trump hears the words, "Welcome, Mr. President, to your new home." On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, January 18th, 2017. Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. President Barack Obama defends his decision to shorten the sentence of convicted military secrets leaker Chelsea Manning. It was one of many topics the president addressed in his final news conference today. Obama telling reporters he granted clemency to Manning because justice has been served in the case.
The sentence that she received was very disproportionate relative to what other leakers had received.
Chelsea Manning, formerly Bradley Manning, is more than 6 years into a 35-year sentence for giving more than 700,000 classified documents to the WikiLeaks website. The transgender Army intelligence officer will be free in May. Republicans are blasting the decision. Vice President-elect Mike Pence calls Manning a traitor. The incoming White House press secretary says it sends a troubling message. But it's not just Republicans slamming the decision.
It was wrong.
Why is that?
Well, that was treason espionage. It should have been 35 years.
I don't know why he did it, and so I'll look forward to hearing his reasoning because I just heard about it. Hundreds of thousands of documents were released. It put national security at risk. It put individual operatives at risk.
Obama has granted more commutations than any other president. President-elect Donald Trump's pick for health secretary says the healthcare system is losing focus on patients, and he insists the Trump administration is not planning to overhaul Medicare. Representative Tom Price, a Republican from Georgia, testified before members of the Senate today. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi was there. Jason?
Wyatt, Price faced tough questions, including on contraceptive coverage and the future of Obamacare. That's a big question here as Republicans make the move to repeal the health care law. Price says his goals for revamping the system include access and affordability.
Representative Tom Price has fought Obamacare since it was first passed in 2010. He even drafted his own plan to dismantle it.
This is going to unravel something that has given a lot of Americans peace of mind.
The orthopedic surgeon turned lawmaker says patients are his first priority.
Nobody's interested in pulling the rug out from under anybody. We believe that it's absolutely imperative that individuals that have health coverage be able to keep health coverage and move, hopefully, to greater choices and opportunities for them to gain the kind of coverage that they want for themselves and for their family.
Under President Obama, HHS issued a mandate forcing most employers to cover contraceptives and abortion-inducing drugs. Price has said the mandate ought to be reversed. Today, top Democrats pressed him on the issue.
Will you commit to ensuring all 18 FDA-approved methods of contraception continue to be covered so that women do not have to go back to paying extra costs for birth control?
We believe strongly that every single American ought to have access to the kind of coverage and care that they desire and want.
Price has a 100% pro-life voting record in Congress.
You want to defund Planned Parenthood.
In fact, he's co-sponsored bills to strip Planned Parenthood of federal funds and place limits on abortion. As for his approach to health care, Price laid it out before the committee.
Who decides about our health care? Should it be the federal government or should it be patients and families and doctors? And we certainly believe the latter as opposed to the former.
If confirmed, Price would oversee a $1 trillion budget, 80,000 employees. It also lead Medicare, Medicaid, the FDA, National Institutes of Health, and the Centers for Disease Control. Wyatt?
Jason, based on what you saw today, do you expect Price will be confirmed?
Well, the Democrats were definitely opposed to Price today, but if he gets the backing of all 52 Republicans, then he'd be confirmed as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And a very good sign was we talked with Maine moderate Senator Susan Collins, moderate Republican, and she said she thought Price did very well. Price has one more confirmation hearing next week.
All right, Jason Calvi reporting from Capitol Hill. Thanks, Jason. As Congress considers a plan to replace Obamacare, many Catholics are concerned about conscience rights. In other words, forcing a medical professional to perform a procedure that violates their deeply held beliefs. Joining us now is Louis Brown, the director for CMF Curo, which is part of the Christ Medicus Foundation, a nonprofit focused on advancing life issues in healthcare. So, Louis, you resigned your position with the Democratic National Committee over the issue of funding for Planned Parenthood with regards to Obamacare. How does that sort of connect, do you think, with conscience rights in sense of repealing or replacing Obamacare?
Sure. I resigned over the federal funding of abortion in healthcare. Didn't want to see that happen. And I think in the similar vein, folks that are medical professionals, folks that are working in hospitals, running hospitals, folks that are part of different healthcare entities as medical professionals should not be forced or penalized for doing something or not refusing to do something that's not consistent with their conscience or consistent with their religious beliefs. If we're really going to have a healthcare system based on freedom, based on respect for the patient, the provider, based on a relationship between patient and doctor that also respects life, it's very important that we protect conscience rights.
It's certainly something that a lot of people want. What do you think is the likelihood that a replacement plan will actually keep in place those rights?
I think it's very likely. If you look at what Congressman Tom Price has put forward before, if you look at what Speaker Ryan supports, if you look at what Senator McConnell supports as well, the fact that we have a pro-life majority in the House and Senate, I think it's very likely that we'll have protections for the right of conscience, religious freedom, and health care, and other pro-life protections that we as a Catholic community want to see.
You mentioned Tom Price. We just saw Jason's piece about that. What do you think about him in particular, and what do you think it is about his policies that could help?
I think he's an excellent choice. He was an orthopedic surgeon for almost 20 years. He was a professor, assistant professor at Emory University. He ran a very celebrated orthopedic practice in Georgia. I think he's the right man for the job. It's really about returning our healthcare system to one that respects the patient-doctor relationship, that respects life, that protects that patient-doctor relationship, and also one that has a principle of responsibility, that we're responsibility for our own health, but that we're also responsible for our health as a community to protect the poor and protect all Americans, but knowing that we must have a place of freedom so that the patient, the consumer, the doctor has a choice in the healthcare plans and the type of healthcare they receive.
One last question really quickly, Louis. What do you think in terms of the likelihood of a replacement plan that will actually address the issue of consumers or patients being actually able to choose the doctor based on religious beliefs?
Yeah, I think that's going to be empowered. I think that Congressman Price and the team around him are very interested in making sure that the patient has maximum choice possible, maximum freedom possible to choose their doctor, to choose their hospital, and also making sure that it's affordable in a way that respects them, in a way that empowers that relationship, and in a way that is really responsible both for the patient and the provider.
Louis Brown, principal with Christ Medicus Foundation, and your website, by the way, is mycatholichealthcare.com if you want to learn more. Thanks, Louis.
Thank you, Wyatt.
And Representative Tom Price was one of several cabinet nominees at the Capitol today. South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley is Trump's choice for U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. She rejects the idea of a registry for Muslim immigrants.
This administration and I don't think there should be any registry based on religion. I think what we do need to do is make sure that we know exactly which countries are a threat, which ones have terrorism, and those are the ones that we need to watch and be careful and vet as we go forward in terms of who comes into the country.
Haley also pledges her support for moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, a shift formally endorsed by Donald Trump but opposed by Palestinians. Trump's nominee for Commerce Secretary says he's pro-trade and pro-union. Wilbur Ross is known as a billionaire investor, but he says he had humble beginnings.
I may be the only nominee ever for Commerce Secretary who actually worked as a census taker.
Ross has extensive business ties around the globe. Supporters say that makes him ideal to represent American business interests. Trump has said Ross will play a big role in American trade policy. Trump's nominee for Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, defended yesterday her beliefs that parents, not politicians, should be able to choose where to send their children to school.
I think accountability is highly important, and I support accountability for all schools, which is why I supported the most recent legislation in Michigan that is now holding all schools, including traditional public schools, accountable for performance.
Critics say DeVos has no connection to public schools and would shift money away from public education if confirmed, but she says she would be a strong advocate for public schools. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. 4 strong earthquakes shake central Italy, striking the same region that suffered a series of deadly quakes last year. There were no immediate reports of casualties, but tremors were felt as far away as Rome. Students were evacuated from school and sought safety on the streets, where traffic came to a stop. After safety checks, children were allowed to return to their classrooms until their parents could take them home. The earthquakes also made it more difficult to get around Rome. Underground metro stations were closed to make sure nothing collapsed. That left people stranded outside. Mary Shevlin, our Rome correspondent, experienced the tremors firsthand. Mary, the quakes have been ongoing throughout the day. How are the people in Rome responding?
Well, at this point, we know that the schools will be closed tomorrow. Not all of them, but some, the ones that are most at risk, those on high floors here around the city. We know that checks are ongoing on railroad tracks, in the metros, and some buildings just in Rome here around the city. So it's a city very much on high alert. Many people wondering, of course, will even stronger quakes be coming through the night? And so that's for us here in the city of Rome. Obviously nothing like what the people in central Italy are facing as they continue to recover after yet another round of devastating earthquakes.
What are the main concerns or the needs of the people near the earthquake epicenters?
Well, Italy hasn't even had snow like this. Let's talk about the snow first of all, because that has been devastating that region now for the past few days. It's already cut off the power before today's earthquakes. Many people not having heat in their homes. A lot of the people who lost their homes in the last round of earthquakes are still living in tents. So these people are without help, without light, without heat, and they're asking, pleading for military vehicles to come up to these isolated areas with their snow plows to help them just to get out of their homes. They can't even escape if a quake were to hit. So getting the proper assistance to the people who need it, especially in these remote areas. We know that even in Assisi, for example, where the quake was also felt today, the friars there have closed the Basilica of Our Lady of the Angels there for fear of quake damage in that area. So churches that would normally be welcoming people are having to close their doors for fear that their structures may collapse as well. Mary,
did the earthquakes then affect today's activities at the Vatican, like the Pope's weekly gathering with pilgrims?
Well, Wyatt, I was following the audience when the quakes first started to hit, and luckily no one in Paul VI's Hall or the Holy Father felt the quakes at all. So there was no disruption to the papal audience today. And if we just think back to this past Saturday, the Holy Father himself was baptizing babies who were born in these areas that have been devastated by the earthquakes. And just before the Epiphany, just before on January 5th, he met with over 800 people from these earthquake devastated zones to offer them comfort and solace, many thinking, of course, that the worst was over, and we certainly hope after today it will be.
Okay, Mary Shevlin, will be keeping those victims and their families in our prayers. Mary Shevlin, our EWTN News Nightly Rome correspondent. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Wyatt.
A suicide bomber attacks a camp in northern Mali, killing more than 50 people. The blast hit an army base that is home to soldiers and hundreds of former fighters. The attack marks a setback for efforts to achieve peace in the tumultuous region in northern Africa. There was no immediate claim of responsibility, but Islamic extremist groups are under suspicion. A stark warning about security threats from Russia in Joe Biden's final speech as vice president. He outlined alleged hacking during the 2016 presidential election and says Russia won't stop with the U.S.
It's not only the United States, I need not tell you, that has been targeted. Europe has seen the same kind of attacks in the past. With many countries in Europe slated to hold elections this year, we should expect further attempts by Russia to meddle in the democratic process. It will occur again, I promise you.
The comments came at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland. Russia continues to deny any interference in the U.S. election. Americans could soon start adopting Russian children again. A high-ranking Russian official says Moscow is willing to open a new discussion with Washington. A ban was put in place in 2012 after the U.S. identified human rights violations. More than 1,000 adoption attempts were estimated to be in progress when the ban took effect. Coming up, a former president suffers a health scare. We'll tell you what sent George H.W. Bush to the hospital, and a look at the role of prayer in past inaugurations. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. Former President George H.W. Bush and former First Lady Barbara Bush are both hospitalized tonight in Houston, Texas. Bush's spokesperson says he was moved to the intensive care unit today to address a respiratory problem from pneumonia. He was first admitted to the hospital Saturday for shortness of breath. The 92-year-old has battled several health issues in recent years. Bush has a form of Parkinson's disease and uses a wheelchair or scooter to get around. Bush's wife Barbara has also been hospitalized as a precaution after experiencing fatigue and coughing. The couple marked their 72nd wedding anniversary on January 6th. At his own inauguration, Bush 41 said he wanted his first act as president to be a prayer. Joining us now is Mary Kate Carey, former speechwriter for President George H.W. Bush. And Mary Kate, I think I speak for all of us when we're wishing the Bush family the best in terms of their health. You know, Mary Kate, it was George Washington who sort of started the inaugural address with the idea of a prayer. How has sort of prayer been a part of inaugural speeches over the years?
Well, it's certainly become a tradition started by President Washington. He started a number of traditions, one of which was also this theme of national unity and common good under the hands of God. And that has continued for many years. As you know, the sort of legislative laundry list does not really belong in the inaugural address. That gets saved for the first joint session address and then later State of the Unions. But this idea of coming together under God's blessings has really gone on for many years. Some presidents more so than others. Some are more workmanlike. For example, Reagan's first inaugural, he talks a lot about the economy and the Soviet Union, but also has a lot of God in there too. So some more than others, depends on the person.
Well, which president had the most references to prayer?
I would say in the modern era, George W. Bush had the most, not necessarily using the word God or the word prayer, but for example, he quotes Mother Teresa. Okay. He talks about the road to Jericho. Well, if you're a Christian, you know what the road to Jericho is, a reference to the Good Samaritan. Things like that. So he don't necessarily have the word God, but it was a very religious speech. And he does what a lot of the presidents have done, Reagan did as well, refers back to a line that George Washington uses where he calls God the great author. And so, for example, in George W.'s inaugural, he talks about the author. We are not the authors of the American story. He is the author, and the story continues. And so it's a very poetic way to acknowledge our first founding father, as well as God's blessings on our country at the same time.
Considering you are a former speechwriter, what advice would you give to Donald Trump as he crafts his inaugural address?
So Donald Trump, in all of 2016, the best speech I think he gave was on election night, when he spoke about things like national unity. He wanted to bring the country together. He wanted to talk about his service to the American people. He was very humble. He said, no dream is too big, no challenge is too great. And so as I read that the other night when I was thinking about this, I realized, you know, that could be a prayer itself. And asking for blessings on his service to the country and asking for national unity. So my advice would be to have Donald Trump do what George H.W. Bush did and start his speech with a prayer. I think it would surprise people. I think it would be very humble. And I think it's in his wheelhouse because he wrote that speech on election night himself, and he's writing his inaugural address himself.
When it comes to George H.W. Bush, you know, you had worked for him, produced a documentary on him. What's your favorite story regarding?
As far as speeches go, I think my favorite was he went to the former Soviet Union, some of the republics, on a tour after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I believe it was in Poland. And people waited for hours and hours in the pouring rain to see him. And, you know, he's not a fan of giving speeches. He'd be the first to say it. And he got onto the stage and he saw how long the people had been waiting and how sopping wet they all were. And he took his speech and he ripped it in half over his head, which gave him great delight. And the crowd roared. And he said, I'm just going to speak to you from the heart. And he gave them about a paragraph on the importance of freedom and why it was so important what they were doing. And he loves it. He's got this great picture in his office of the speech in 2 pieces.
One of many memorable stories, I'm sure.
Not good for speechwriters, but good for him.
Mary Kate Carey, former speechwriter for President George H.W. Bush. Thanks so much for talking with us.
Thanks for having me.
Inauguration Day is also a moving day at the White House. The minute the Obamas leave, staffers prepare for the new first family. It's organized chaos inside the White House on Inauguration Day. By 10:45 a.m., the Obamas will likely leave the White House for good, giving the chief usher and his staff just 6 hours to get the 132-room mansion ready for the new administration. Former White House Chief Usher Gary Walters helped coordinate the moves of 5 presidents, including Reagan, Bush 41, Clinton, and Bush 43.
It's a choreograph. It's like a ballet.
The chief usher has a team of about 90 staffers, but every second counts. By the time Donald and Melania Trump return from the inaugural parade, the White House has to feel like home.
Their clothes are in their closets. Their personal effects are in the bathroom. Their favorite foods are in the kitchen. We break the staff down almost minute to minute in their activities.
Florists, art curators, carpenters all pitch in. The chief usher usually works closely with the First Lady. Walters helped Hillary Clinton choose wallpaper and Laura Bush pick out china. But even a dance as well choreographed as this one isn't always perfect. In 1993, Walters lost his voice and had to write all directions on a notepad. When Bill Clinton arrived, he welcomed him with a whisper. That same year, Mrs. Clinton's inaugural ball gown disappeared during the move.
There was a rather frightful time for about 15 minutes until we located the dress.
And on Inauguration Day 1989, Bush 41's granddaughter surprised the White House staff by showing up 2.5 hours early in the middle of the move. This year, if all goes smoothly, the Trumps will never know of the chaos that preceded their arrival at the White House. The chief usher will meet Donald Trump at the door and offer a simple greeting. Welcome, Mr. President, to your new home. With only 3 small elevators in the White House residence, getting one president out and the other in is never easy, depending on how much Donald Trump is planning to redecorate. Walls need to be painted, carpet changed, paintings hung, books set on shelves. The staff eats at scheduled times so that the work never stops. Up next, the Pope with pilgrims. His message during this week of prayer for Christian unity, and a bone-chilling religious ceremony in Russia as the Orthodox celebrate Epiphany. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. Pope Francis calls on Christians to come together in more visible ways. He spoke to pilgrims at the start of the week of prayer for Christian unity.
Come cristiani abbiamo la responsabilità di questo messaggio e dobbiamo testimoniarlo con la nostra vita.
The Holy Father says reconciliation and unity are possible and invites Christians to look at what unites us rather than what divides us. He recalled the prayer service he attended in Sweden last October to commemorate the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation. Members of the Orthodox Church gather at the Jordan River near Jericho for a group baptism. Dozens of people dressed in white submerged themselves in the water as clergy conducted the baptism ceremony.
Because it's God with us in our churches, and He's here, and our smiling.
A white dove was released by clergy who led the ceremony. The Greek Orthodox Patriarch of Jerusalem, Archbishop Theophilus III, participated in today's event. And Russian Orthodox Christians brave extreme cold, taking a dip in icy waters to mark the eve of their Epiphany. A makeshift church was built on a frozen river, and a hole was cut into the ice to enable people to walk into the 40-degree water. The inside of the church was a comfortable 70 degrees with the help of heaters. Orthodox Christians celebrate the Epiphany on January 19th. And we thank you for being with us tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Good night, and God bless.